Yeah. So me and Strat got a show tonight. We got a show tonight. So we be here doing this, doing that, doing that. But I want to talk about this issue. Do you do this? Do you do this? And I think many of you may do. All right. May do this. All right. Welcome to CNN. I'm Kirk Kennedy. Let's go in. All right. So earlier today, I just had this thought. And I use Facebook and Twitter. I don't even use them that much anymore. I just I just don't care anymore. But I use Facebook and Twitter sometimes to just get out of thought. And for some reason, people always seem to feel like you need to prove your point or want to argue your point. Like, listen, I am old enough to remember agree to disagree. So I don't know even that. But so here's what I said. Here's what I put on Facebook. I tweeted. I want to know if you do this. Do you do this? So here's what I put. I said Satan through witchcraft is better at conversion than the church. And it's not because people are simply rejecting Jesus because they hate the gospel. Often they're deconstructing him, Jesus, because of the hatred they see in us. So my point is that a lot of people aren't walking away from Christianity because they just hate the gospel, right? It's because they see the hatred in us who profess to believe the gospel, right? This happens all the time. And people like, I don't know what it is, right? I remember doing a debate with Vodi Bakum in 2021, and I was making statements about the church, and he, in front of everyone, was like, "You're slandering the church, and I'm not going to stand for." And then I ended up proving my point, which I don't even know what he was talking about. But there's a sense of like, if you critique the church or say something, how dare you? But like the Bible is replete, like God is like serious. Like, yeah, the church is, but there's problems, right? You got First Peter 4. It says, "Judgment begins in the household of God." You know, if the righteous are scarcely saved, so there's this idea that people act like that. So here was a comment that I got to that post. This is a comment, and I want to know if you do this. So here's the comment. Here's what it says, and this happens anytime you mention being loving or not being loving. Here's the comment. It says, "If we start with love is what God says it is, and not how people define it, then there's something here. But if love, in quotations, if love is pretending baby murdering is good and alphabet community embracing inclusion is right, then there's another problem, right?" So here's the point. I said that people are not, I think Satan, through like witchcraft, it's becoming the fastest growing religion, right? This is documented. People are saying this. That's satanic. I believe it's from the devil. My point is that the church in America, at least, does not seem to be making progress in the way of conversions in that way. In fact, the decline of religion is going down. I'm saying here's why. I think because, Jesus says they will know you by your love for one another. I do not think in this day and age that is a reality for the American church, evangelical, mainline, whatever. I think that thing is gone, right? There's not a love for each other. So when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about that's what Jesus defined as the hallmark of the church. I don't think that's happening. So this comment comes in, well, you right, unless love is defined by accepting, abortion and all these other things, right? And homosexuality. That's what he's trying to say. So do you do this? Do you do this? Because let me tell you what I think the problem is. Let me tell you what I think the problem is. This is what's happened among a lot of believers. And if you're of the Christian tradition, I wouldn't be surprised if you do this. Here's what happens. I know a lot of Christians, people who profess to be believers in Jesus, right? Who define love, being loving, by doing the opposite of what the world defines it as, right? So it's like, well, so they're loving. I'm not going to be loving. I'm not going to support this. I'm not voting for this. I'm not going to agree with this. And that's fine, right? But when you do that, this is what's happening. When you talk like that, you are basically saying, without even realizing it, that the people who define love are the world, those people. But God defines love. He defines love, not the world. So when we're talking about being loving, I'm not even thinking about what they're thinking about. I'm thinking about what God has said in his word, right? So when it's like, well, and I think this is what's happening. I think a lot of believers do this, and I wonder if you do this. Do you define things that are of God by the definitions of the world, and then and you're not going to do that, right? Because you can focus on, well, I'm not going to agree with this, and I'm not going to agree with that. I'm not voting for this. I'm not agreeing with this, right? You can do all of that to not be loving like the world, but not at all be loving the way God says it. You could do all of that and think, I'm standing up for righteousness' sake. Didn't the Pharisees do that? Didn't they think that they were honoring God by challenging Jesus and stamping their flag? Like, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying be loving like the world. I don't do that. I'm not accepting none of it. I don't care what they say. And if I'm a bigot, if I'm this and if they cancel my YouTube channel, so what, man? I ain't no YouTube in heaven. I'm not gonna be sitting there making no videos when I'm up top, when we up top, you know. So if they get mad at me for that, then so what, man? But I feel like what's happening to Christianity is our faith has become what we're against. We're not going to be loving like that. Okay, well then be loving like the Lord then. Why are you worried about how they say love is instead of just honor the Lord, be loving like the Lord? Who cares what they say? This is the problem I see happening. I think people do this all the time. Everything is about not being like the world and not being like this, right? And it's like, fam, when I think about we're not honoring the Lord with our love, I'm not thinking we're not honoring the Lord because we disagree with abortion or we're not honoring the Lord. We're not honoring, I don't even consider that because to me, God defines love. So when I evaluate if I'm loving, I don't start with what the world says, what the culture says. I don't start with what these people say. I start with what's clearly articulated in the Bible. And am I doing that? You know what I think has happened to the church in America, particularly, and maybe to some of you watching? I think you're reacting. Your faith has turned from what's the word say? What are the fruits of the spirit? It's turned into what are they saying? And I'm not going to do that. So your faith, instead of being about your relationship with God, your faith is turned into your relationship with the people that you disagree with, and you don't even see it. So here's how I responded to the comment. Here's how I responded. I ain't gonna hold y'all, and I ain't saying I got everything figured out, right? But here's what I would say. Here's how I responded to this bad boy. Where is he at? Don't take your comment down, sir. All right, here's what I said. I said, so remember, he said, if we start with love is what God say, it is most not how people define it, then there's something here. But if love is pretending baby murdering is good and homosexuality is right, then there's another problem. So I said nothing of the sort. I think too many believers let themselves off the hook from being loving because of comments like yours. When I think of being loving, that stuff doesn't even cross my mind. God defines love, not the world. So when I mention being loving, I'm not talking about the conservative talking points that you're talking about. That's not loving as defined by God either, right? So what I'm trying to say is, I think we're so offended at Christianity in America has largely been the dominant view, not that everyone believed it or even obeyed it, but accepted it as the premise of which we build things off of. We do not have and have never had a Christian nation. And anyone who wants to defend it, let's go to the mattresses. I'm ready. I want all that smoke, right? So now that it's tougher to be a Christian in America, we're all offended. People are all lathered up, all ready to fight. And you got to vote this and vote this and vote that. Listen, fam, let's be clear. Isaiah 66, 1 and 2. God said, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. So the devil is kingdom. This is his world. He's ruler of this world. So the devil is the ruler of God's footstool. Man, we ain't got nothing to trip off of. So I think what's happened is now that Christianity costs something, it's a little difficult. A lot of us are being like, well, I ain't going to be loving because, fam, Don't stop defining love by political means or what they say. Go back to the scriptures. Do you weep with those who weep? Do you mourn with those who mourn? Are you rude? Right? Let's go through 1 Corinthians 13. Love is patient, it's kind, it is not rude. It does not, do you insist on your own way? Man, I see so many Christians telling you you're not a believer unless you agree or think the way they think. What are you talking about, right? So when you're talking about being loving, why are you defining it from what the world says? You're not loving to God if you're not, just because you're not loving like the world says. You can be like, I reject all of that and not be patient, not be kind, not be resentful, keep a record of wrongs. You can do all those things. And so we have to be careful. And I think a lot of believers do this. You might be one of them. I kid you not, bro. I've seen this happen where like the church is wilding right now. You got all these people defining love by what they're not going to do instead of what God said do. I don't care about people, their definition. They didn't die on the cross for me and they daggone. I'm not going to stand before them and give an account. I care about what God says. So maybe you don't do this. If you don't, I know there was a point in my life where I felt like a lot of my Christianity was defined by like sort of warlike terms, like I'm fighting against the culture. Man, the culture is the mission field. It ain't the battlefield. You know what I'm saying? The culture's the mission field, fam. But what do I know? I just think people be tripping, and I think a lot of us have to be careful that we don't lose the foundation of what God said to us about what it means to be loving, because where our love is what we're not going, we're defining ourselves by what we're against rather than what God says we should be for. Be careful, brothers and sisters. It's going to, hearts are turning cold because of it. We know what it means to be loving. We have it in our word. Obey that. And if you obey that, you by default are not going to obey what the world says. But you cannot obey the definition of love from the world and not obey God. But I don't know. What am I talking about? I'm just a big black dude whose dreads is getting long. See y'all in a couple of hours for Cross Examine, 7:30. The Wolverine and Beast, we back. Grace and peace, y'all.